Hi, my name is Kirsten, and I would just like to formally welcome you to my January reading wrap up, my first reading wrap up of 2026. I am very excited because this January was so fantastic for reading, which is a relief because I feel like 2025 I had a lot of misses and a lot of books that I just didn't feel like they did what I wanted them to do, and it was just kind of a tough year for reading for me. So I'm just really excited that January started off on such a high note for me with reading, and hopefully that tracks throughout the rest of the year. Now, a couple of things you need to know about me as far as my reading habits. I tend to like to know as little as possible about a book before I jump into it, which, as you will see here in a minute, sometimes bites me in the butt. I'm just not a synopsis reading girly. If you tell me to read this book, or if I see it and I think the cover looks interesting and the first like 3 sentences interest me, I'll probably read it. So that's kind of my reading prerogative, and that is how I started my first book with Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Now I know what you're thinking. Mate is the second book in the series. That is correct. I have this horrible habit where I find this popular romance series that everyone is reading, and I pick one and I start to read it, and I don't realize that it is like the third or fourth one in a universe of romance where it doesn't really matter if you read them out of order, but it just makes more sense if you do read them in order. And so I accidentally started with Mate by Ali Hazelwood, and I was confused. The first like 3 chapters, I was like, I feel like I probably should know more than what's going on. So I Googled if you need to read Bride before you need to read Mate, and the answer is yes. So stopped what I was doing, stopped listening to Mate, and started listening to Bride. And great reading experience. I thought the premise was so much fun. It was so just so love vampires, love werewolves, love like forced marriage. And that part was great. Like the storytelling was fun, the banter was fun, and the twists and turns were really fun. But I already knew so much information because I accidentally started with Mate. So that whole like twisty turny part of our main character's relationship with, I'm like forgetting their names, but I knew the big point of contention between these two characters already because of accidentally listening to the first part of Mate. So if you want to jump in to Ali Hazelwood and you're into like vampires and werewolves, start with Bride. It'll help you a lot. I gave it 4 stars simply because I liked it, but on a level of like, this was just fun. It didn't really feel like it taught me anything new. I didn't feel like I gained any new insight, or like it was like an earth-shattering story, but it was a well-written story and it was really fun. You get a werewolf and a vampire that have to marry each other for political rest and political ease. And obviously there are biological differences and really complicated dynamics there with how each race is perceived and how like each race perceives each other. And so that like maneuvering is really interesting, and there's really good growth in the characters. And so it's like kind of enemies to lovers, forced marriage, and it was really fun. So I gave 4 stars to Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I ran out of audiobook listening hours on Spotify, so I can't listen to Mate yet and finish it. And I'm also like 243rd in line on Libby. So I either wait for several months on Libby, or I just wait for my hours to renew on Spotify. So hopefully that's soon and I can finish out this series in the right order. And with Mate, I will thankfully have the benefit of not like knowing a huge spoiler in the book. So yeah, that was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now, okay, the second book that I read this year was The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. Now this is a book my husband recommended to me, and our track record with him recommending books to me has not been super great. I haven't loved all of them, so I was a little nervous. But The Rook, y'all. Okay, we follow a woman named Myfanwy Thomas who wakes up one day and doesn't remember who she is. She doesn't know that she's Myfanwy. She doesn't know how she woke up in this place that she did, covered in blood, covered in bruises. But she's got a letter in her pocket that says, "You are Myfanwy Thomas, or someone in Myfanwy Thomas's body. You can either choose to run away or figure out who did this to me." And so Myfanwy decides that she wants to try and figure out what is happening, like why she doesn't remember this body, this person, this like personality that she has. So she takes the route of figuring out what happened to her. And over time, she learns that she's a part of this secret organization. They're kind of like superheroes, and there's different levels that kind of play off of a chessboard. They are just a secret magical company of people that basically keep England safe and keep the area safe from people who poorly use magic or don't know that they have magic and kind of explode all over the place. And so she was recruited at a young age, she learns, and trained her a specific kind of magic. And it's so much fun. It's so funny and really interesting. The way you get the story, it like flips from real-time Myfanwy, like trying to pretend she knows what she's doing in her job, and then also other chapters we get past Myfanwy writing letters to the new Myfanwy just about her life and giving her downloads on who people are and situations that happened in the world that are significant. And so you're getting this like dual storytelling, which is really cool. And it's a woman written by a man that is normal and like that she's not super sexualized or just like the common way that men write women is not there. Like, it's really well done. It's so funny. It's very unique in the way that it tells the story. It feels like a very fresh story, that something is just different about it. And it is a trilogy, maybe more than a trilogy. I think actually more books are coming out, or a fourth one was just released. And so once I kind of get through my like top list for 2026, I will be continuing this series because it was just so much fun and really refreshing. Obviously, she's British, and there's this scene that cracks me up where there are people from the American embassy coming to like help them solve this major problem, this major crisis that's happening. There was this old group of magic users that tried to rise up and take over, basically. And so they're calling in the Americans to like try and help. And her secretary calls and she is like, "Okay, I called the Americans, they're coming." And Myfanwy replies back and says, "All of them?" And it just audibly made me laugh. It's really funny. I just really enjoyed it. Myfanwy is a really fun character. All of the side characters are really interesting too. And yeah, the dynamics between magic users and non-magic users is really interesting, and imagery is just phenomenal. I could see everything happening so clearly. Oh my gosh. And yeah, I highly recommend The Rook. I gave it 5 stars. It was just such a, oh my gosh, he's really scared of the ice falling on places, and I'm scared of him digging his claws into my skin. The Rook was really fun, a great story. I just really loved it. So that was The Rook. Next, for my book club, our January book was Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, and I picked this up because I love Carrie Kinread. She is like my bookish booktube queen, especially because Pierre Ford no longer makes book content, which is really sad. Anyway, Carrie talked about T. Kingfisher and Nettle and Bone, and I remembered that from one of her videos a while ago, and so I just decided that would be our January book because we hadn't read a fantasy yet. And so in Nettle and Bone, you're following Mara, who is a princess, and her 2 older sisters have been married off to this same prince. The oldest sister, who gets married first, she ends up dying. And so the second older sister goes and marries this prince. And Myfanwy and Mara gets sent to a convent, and that's where she spends a lot of her time. She learns how to embroider, she does a lot of that. She eventually learns how to deliver babies, and she just like spends her time with the sisters in the convent. Now her sister, her actual sister, has a baby, and so her and her mom go to the kingdom that her sister was married into to meet the baby and be there for the delivery. And when Mara gets there, she realizes that her sister is off. Like there's something wrong. Or she's there for her funeral, actually, not the birth. And she comes to discover that Mara is being abused by her husband, by the prince. And he's really just like trying to keep her pregnant, and she's not holding pregnancies. And so Mara is like, well, I have to do something about this. So she goes and visits the Dustwife, which is someone, she's like, they're like guards of graveyards, and they can talk to spirits and dead people. And she's like, I need to do something about this. And the Dustwife is like, okay, here's 3 impossible tasks. I want you to do them. And so she has to make a cloak out of nettle and bone, which like really destroys her hands. And then she has to make a bone dog out of like, it's like a dead dog that she has to rebuild with bones, and he comes to life. And then the 3rd task is she has to catch moonlight. And so she does these things, except for the last thing, because the Dustwife is like, that's impossible, so I'll just help you. And so we're sent on this journey of Mara and the Dustwife finding ways to take down the king. We come in contact with a guy named Fenris, who is kind of a slave, and then we meet a godmother named Agnes, and these 4 people band together and just journey and find theirself into the kingdom where the sister is, so that they can kill the prince. And that premise in itself is interesting, but the execution was not there, in my opinion. I thought that it was stilted, and what was so upsetting was that there were several times when horror elements were going to be brought into the story, where it was going to get really weird and really creepy, and then those things just kind of like went away. I feel like if we had stayed there a little bit longer, we could have really like held on to the story tighter. And like, I don't know, it just was so close to being something that I would have really loved. It was so close. And then all of a sudden it would be like, oh yes, this is getting really good. And then it would just kind of plummet down into a place I didn't really care about. And I felt like the romance was just kind of thrown in there to call it a romantasy. And my book club had a great point about how the narrator, Mara, is supposed to be like 30 years old, but she feels immature, and it feels like we're reading a teenager's point of view instead of a 30-year-old woman. And so that was interesting. So yeah, I gave Nettle and Bone 3 stars. I wanted so badly to like it more than I did, especially because Carrie liked it, I think. And it just kind of fell flat for me. It was still good, and the premise of the story was good, but it was like almost what I wanted. So that was Nettle and Bone. I gave it 3 stars because it wasn't horrible, and there were some really good like horror elements to it, but it just never really reached the place I wanted it to. So that's Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. Next I read Road Trip with a Vampire by Jenna Levine. This follows a witch who has hung up her magical powers and a vampire who has lost his memory. And they meet up, and the witch is kind of like, I need to figure out what to do because not using my magic is making me anxious. She has like outbursts of power because she's not using it regularly. And so I need to like flex my magic a little bit and like get it out and get into a routine of like expending my magic so it doesn't overwhelm me. And the vampire, Peter, is like, I need to go on this road trip so I can remember who I am and like what my job is. And so along the way, you learn more about the vampire, Peter, and like what his job is, what he was sent to do, why he lost his memory. And it ended up having to do with the witch. And I cannot for the life of me remember her name. And the biggest issue I had with this book was that the reason our witch decided to give up her powers didn't feel like powerful enough or like moving enough for me for her to have that sort of reaction. Like the response to what happened was for her to just stop being a witch. And the situation, like no one died, no one got hurt, people just almost got hurt. And so that freaked her out from doing magic again. But in previous years, like she had killed people with her magic and she had done like way worse things, but that didn't like wake her up from her behavior. And so that just like the stakes didn't feel high enough for me to sympathize with why she gave up doing magic. So that was just like the only issue I had. Otherwise, it was funny. It was like really random and a good read. Like it was just a fun read. But yeah, the only problem I had, it was just like that emotional event didn't feel like as big of a deal as she made it to be. So that was Road Trip with the Vampire. I gave it 5 stars just because I had a good time. Now, guys, this next book is probably going to be my top book of 2026. Like, genuinely the most beautiful piece of fiction I've read in a very long time. Like, since I think I read The Women 3 years ago. This book is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. And this is just such a beautiful story. So we are following a family in Korea through generations. So we meet parents, and one of them has a cleft palate and one of them is from a poor family, and they get married, which is a big deal because if you have a deformity, like his parents never thought he would get married. But him and his wife got married and they had a daughter named Sunja. And Sunja was like the light of their life and the light of the father's life. He loved her so much. Like they would go to the market together and he would teach her things. And then unfortunately he passed away. And so the mother had to find ways to support their family. So they opened up their home to be a boarding house, and fishermen would stay there and pay to stay with them. Now the bulk of this book happens during the Japanese occupation of Korea. So we see a lot of racism and oppression happening. And one day Sanjana is walking through town and she meets this man who is like double her age, and he starts grooming her basically and love bombing her. And eventually she becomes pregnant with this man's child, only to find out that he has a wife and kids in Japan. He is a Korean man, but he has a wife and kids that live in Japan. And she's like, I can't be with you. Like, I don't ever want to see you again. So now enter in Isaac, who is a preacher who has tuberculosis. He is very sick and he stays at the boarding house and he gets nursed back to health there. And he offers to marry Sunja because she's now a marked woman. Like, she has had a child out of wedlock. No one knows who the father is, and she is now unmarriable. And so for the sake of her and her mother, he decides to marry her, but he is going to Japan because he has a job there. So they move to Japan and just, again, experience like the most tragic levels of racism against them being Korean people in Japan and fighting this system that just wasn't set up for them. Like, they're sent to live in the slums and are called the worst of the worst names, and yet they're given the worst conditions to live in, and like no one cares. And so Sunja has 2 boys, and as Sunja gets older, the story starts to center on the 2 boys and their occupation and how they live life and their marriages, and then we follow their children. And it is just, it's so beautiful. And it's just like, you see so much about women persevering. Something that is talked about often in the book is a woman's lot in life is to suffer. And you see Sunja suffer, and you see her cousin Kyung-hee suffer. And it's just like so heartbreaking and yet so beautiful to watch these women sustain through these terrible times and these terrible situations and death, and how they manage to make life beautiful for their family and how they managed to like hold on to their sanity and hold on to their faith, and it was just so beautiful. Like I'll never ever stop talking about this book and how that's like it's like how I feel about the women. It was just so good. I need everyone ever to read Pachinko, and it's beautiful. Beautiful book. So if you need something to break your heart and put it back together and then break it again, Pachinko by Min Jin Lee is for you. The last book I read in January was kind of highly anticipated because if you know anything about me, I am a Sarah Adams ride or die. Any romance book she puts out, I'm there. I love her. I love her stories. And so When in Rome is the last installment of the When in Rome romance series, which follows 4 sisters and their lives and their romance. And it was just so good. She does such a great job of representing mental health in the man and the woman, and like appropriate ways to handle that within yourself and as a loved one and as someone who like needs to ask for help and someone who needs to offer help. She just has such a beautiful way of doing that. And so her romance books always, like especially When in Rome, always just feels more deep than some like erotica romance that I feel like is taking the industry by storm right now. So I just love Sarah Adams, and I love the sisters in these series, and it's a sweet family, and they're not without issues. They're like not without arguing and without fractures, but they're a family that loves each other, and it just is so sustained through the series, and it's so beautiful, and I love them. So that was my January. Crazy. A pretty decent run of books for the beginning of the year, which I'm thrilled about. Again, I really hope that tracks. I am about to DNF my first book of the year, I think. I'm trying to read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and I'm just not tracking. It's really hard for me to read sci-fi. Like, the scientific jumble is like soup in my brain, and I do not sympathize with the character at all, and so I just like have a hard time carrying. I'm gonna try reading some more tonight, and if I can't get through it, I'm gonna put it down because I'm 30% in, and I'm like, every time I look at it, I'm like, I don't want to read you, which isn't a great way to approach a book. So I am very excited to read this year. I have 26 books that I want to read in 2026. You can find all of those books on my TikTok, Book Club with Kirsten, and I've gotten through quite a decent amount of those books just in January. So I'm excited. I think that's a great way to approach reading, actually, because when I set a super high reading goal, I never meet it because I feel pressure to read books that will help me meet my goal. Sticking with 26 books for 2026 and hoping that they continue to wow me and amaze me like January has. So thank you for watching. I hope that you have found a book that you would like to read, and I will see you in the next one.